Evil Dead was not the original title. The original title was Book of the Dead. And when we first took it out to be sold, our agent, a fine man by the name of Irvin Shapiro, said, "Fellas, people are going to think they have to read for 90 minutes if you call it Book of the Dead. Call it The Evil Dead." We thought it was the dumbest title we've ever heard, but what do we know? This is a swamp in Brighton, Michigan. Sam is the actual cameraman. I am pushing him in an inflatable raft from behind, and the camera, 16 millimeter, is taped to his hand. Now, Sam will lie to you about this car. He calls it a classic. It's a 73 Delta 88 Oldsmobile, and it's a piece of junk. This car had been in numerous Super 8 millimeter movies of Sam's in the past, and for some reason he felt obligated to use it in this movie. We tried to wreck it, but it didn't work, and you'll find out that this movie is in almost every one of, this car is in almost every one of Sam Raimi's movies from this point on. Now, these good folks are all from Michigan, all these actors, myself included. And they were assembled very delicately and carefully because no one really wants to be in a horror movie. You'll notice that one of the actors is wearing a Michigan State t-shirt. That's where Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert went to school. Now, this is called the Force, this roaming entity. That is done strictly by bolting the camera to a 2x4 with a wide-angle lens and running really quickly. This was also before the days of stuntmen. So on a lonely road in rural Tennessee, we just sort of had to trust that a bunch of moonshine-swilling yahoos weren't going to kill us for this little stunt. And fortunately, they didn't. So let's sit back and watch some fine acting.
Right out of my hand. You understand that I had this thing in for a tune-up yesterday, and they said they'd go over everything.
Yeah, well, I was 21 years old, so you can't really blame me, okay? Yeah, this lousy horn. Now watch carefully, folks. See these two idiots? That is Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert, right there. Yes, and they'll brag about their wonderful performance, but we all know that they're just a couple of stiffs.
Hey, Scotty, what's this place like anyway?
Now, see that moonshine in Scott's hand there? That was actually from some footage that was cut out, and my reaction there is actually reacting to a scene where we all sipped moonshine, but it didn't make any sense that kids from northern Michigan would all of a sudden produce moonshine. So now it doesn't make any sense, so there you have it. Now, Ellen Sandweiss on the far left in the back seat had been in a bunch of high school plays with us and Super 8 movies. The other actors were cast.
I think this is where we get off.
Yes, this is a dangerous bridge in rural Tennessee. We filmed outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, on a real craggy old bridge. Now, these logs that are falling here, we call them affectionately It's Murder beams because it's from an old Super 8 movie we did called It's Murder, where we used a bunch of these U-shaped beams that are really styrofoam. They're just really handy if you want to break them over somebody's head, and we'll get to that later in the movie. The gentleman sitting right there in the front seat is not the actress. That's Sam Raimi pretending to be, Teresa Tilley, who is in the front seat there. Named Sarah York, by the way, because she didn't want to use her real name. Can you blame her? Now, this cabin that you're going to see shortly actually was in the middle of nowhere. And we thought it would be a good idea to introduce the geography of this place by just plain showing it to you, just putting the camera on the top of a van. You can see the camera, you know, slapping into the tree branches as we go, and taking you for a ride down this lonely road. The cabin, in fact, does exist, portions of it today. It burned down a year or two after we were filming. Sam will probably tell you a horrible lie about that. It really just burned down by a bunch of yahoos who came and lit a fire in it. The fireplace is made out of stone. And recently at a film festival in Illinois, someone brought me a hunk of stone from the fireplace. They tracked it down, and I signed their stone. Yes, folks, they've got plenty of free time on their hands. The idea here is to establish a sort of creepy presence. This furniture was built by a guy named Dart, Steve Frankel. He was we called him the art director, but he was really a carpenter who was very handy with a skill saw. This cabin was in pretty miserable shape when we found it. It had about 4 inches of cow manure on the floors because cattle were just roaming freely through the place. It had a very low ceiling and a couple of extra rooms that we didn't need. And it had no basement whatsoever. So the first couple of weeks that we were there, any actor or any crew member who wasn't doing anything was assigned to work on the cabin, stripping off old newspaper-like wallpaper, digging the basement, and tearing out ceilings and scraping cow crap off the floors. So it was a very glamorous event, let me tell you.
supposed to be one of these on here.
Yes, wasn't that creepy? Now, inside here, you're going to get a good look at the cabin. I think Sam did a very good job establishing what this place looks like, where it is, so that you're ready to be taken on your scary journey. The one thing that I think you'll find different about the pace of The Evil Dead is it's a little slower. It was shot, as I said, in 1979, and we weren't in any huge hurry. It was long before, you know, the wacky world of MTV, and the pace gets slower at times, and I think you can use that to build tension and to set good moods. Obviously, in the background there, we were losing daylight, because on low-budget shoots, you just sort of have to get it shot whenever you could. We initially designed to start the movie in the summer in Michigan. It was took us a little too long to raise the money, so we didn't actually start filming until fall of '79, and we had to go south because Michigan was getting too cold. So we found this cabin in Tennessee in the middle of nowhere. A lot of the stuff, the set dressing in here is reminiscent of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You'll find in some of the scenes in that of, you know, feathers and bones and things hanging. We thought it was very creepy because Texas Chainsaw was a definite influence because it's really a classic and it scared the crap out of all of us. The score, the wonderful haunting score, is done by the one and only Joe LaDuca, who has worked with us pretty much to this day on numerous film scores, and he also scored, you know, Xena and Hercules, the legendary journeys. So now that we know where everything is, the story will slowly begin. Sam wanted a very specific sort of a grandfather clock that had the arm because he had a sequence in mind where time essentially stops, which you'll see here shortly. That's Ellen Sandweiss. She's our cohort from the Michigan days, doing plays and whatnot. She was very game. We wanted to work with someone on this particular role that we knew and that we could beat the crap out of, and she wound up doing a very good job. Join us. You can hear that is probably Sam Raimi's voice doing that. During the course of doing the sound in New York City years later, we all pitched in and did various things. Something bad is happening. Now, Ellen is actually sort of tracing over a drawing that our makeup artist, Tom Sullivan, did. He was a very accomplished artist, and he gave her a template here to draw from, which is sort of a premonition for the evil Book of the Dead that they will find soon enough. Book of the Dead being based on sort of the Sumerian Book of the Dead, I believe otherwise known as the Necronomicon. A little lesson there for you. Whatever you do, don't look in the cellar. Yo, it startled me, just like it should have you. Okay, this is our lame attempt at ad-libbing this early scene. This is a bunch of highly inexperienced actors attempting to be charming, witty, and urbane. And unfortunately, I don't think it quite pulls off. Sam wanted the drink that they were mixing. It's like a berry drink. He wanted it to be like blood, clearly.
He said,
Yes, notice there's a lot of editing here to take out various lame things that didn't work.
Which means?
Now, he says party down. In another language, when the film was translated, they translated it like he said, pour it down. We were assuming it meant his drink or whatever. Now, this piece of music is sort of reminiscent of, I believe it's called, what is it? Something, Mysterious Island. That's it, a famous Bernard Herrmann piece, because we like the music so much. So we insisted that Joe LaDuca sort of emulate that.
Whatever it is, it's still down there. I don't like cellars.
Now, they're looking into the non-existent cellar that we had to dig about 4 feet down. And you'd think, well, why didn't they dig the rest of the cellar? Because we knew there was a very good cellar back up in Michigan. So you'll see this young fella here that's rich, his real name is not what it appears in the movie. In the movie, he's credited as Hal Delrich, but that's only because his first name was Rich, and he had two roommates, Hal and Del. So that's how he created his stage name. The woman on the right there in the movie is credited as Sarah York, and we kind of helped her with that name. We thought, if you're going to go with a fake name, make it sound like some phony Hollywood name.
Back in a minute.
So good old quote-unquote Hal is going down into the basement here, and now you will see that he will appear in a root cellar outside of Marshall, Michigan, at a farmhouse that was in Rob Tappert's family. One of these days.
Hey, Scotty, you find anything? Scotty?
Notice that there's no ceiling above them. We had to tear that out. Where those beams were is actually where the ceiling was, but we couldn't put any lights anywhere. So we had to tear the whole darn thing out and fix lights up all above and around there. Made filming much easier. Main room was actually cut in two. We tore out a whole wall so that we could create a large main room.
Linda, give me a flashlight.
Well, that's the only one we brought up.
Then get the lantern.
Okay, relax. All right, I lied. I'm going down into the basement now, and you'll see that appear very shortly in Marshall, Michigan. Notice how I sort of have to go around the corner because there was no place for me to go. It's a little cheese ball, but what can we say? We were young and foolish. That's Marshall, Michigan there, looking back up to Knoxville, Tennessee. Isn't it wonderful? Several months later, I might add. Coming up here, these cheese ball shoes drove me insane. Sam wanted something that would be timeless. He wanted me to wear colors that would not get outdated. Notice I have a pen and a pad of paper in my pocket. Why I have that in there, I have no idea. But as a dork person who was 21 years old, I actually sort of carried that stuff around. Maybe I had to make notes while we were filming or something. I have no idea. It became continuity. This cellar was really cool because it had a dirt floor and rock walls, and we thought it was really ideal, and you don't find that many cellars. This is sort of typical of those Midwestern cellars. So we thought, well, what the heck? The sound you're hearing, there's a very light, trilling sort of wind here. That is from an Orson Welles movie called The Third Man. And that's the beauty of sound. You can sort of steal things from other movies when there isn't music to get in the way. Now these drips here, Sam wanted to emphasize them more specifically, so we actually put Caro syrup instead of water on top of the pipes. It would elongate the drips. All these scary sounds were recorded in New York City, probably at least 2 to 3 years after we filmed this. The film took from 1979 to 1983 to actually make. It didn't get into theaters until 1983 because we kept running out of money and filming some more. So you can sort of, if you watch carefully, you can watch me age a couple of years. Go from Mr. Babyface to less of a babyface, and I'm sure you'll see my hairstyles change a little bit. But that's the beauty of motion pictures. Notice the hanging gourds. Sam had sort of a thing about these hollowed out gourds. They were all over the property up there in Michigan. So Sam thought, yeah, let's hang them from strings. That'll be good. We're going to shift locations again shortly here, folks. Coming up, we're going to go from Marshall, Michigan to Franklin, Michigan in Sam's garage because we needed to film some additional scenes. So right in here, bingo, we're now in Ferndale, Michigan several months later. And it was tricky because we didn't really pay the actors much. Everyone got $100 a week. And they had to go off and do other jobs, so we could only get them back when we could. Now look closely at the Hills Have Eyes poster in the background there. Sam's theory, and he'll explain this probably in his commentary, I'll just do a better job, is that in the movie The Hills Have Eyes, there's a poster of Jaws ripped in half in a scene where the bad guys bite the head off a little bird and drink its blood. And Sam interpreted that as horrible as Jaws is, it's not as horrible as what's happening in that trailer. So what Sam figured was if he took the Hills Have Eyes poster and tore that in half, we would say, no matter how scary Hills Have Eyes is, it's not as scary as what you're watching right now. And so between the several movies, Sam and Wes Craven have sort of been communicating that back and forth, sort of challenging each other. These props were built by Tom Sullivan, who was an artist, and he's also a sculptor. And he sort of built these things by hand. That's the death dagger. and the actual Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, that he did all the drawings for as well.
Come on, let's take this stuff upstairs. I'll grab the recorder, and you get everything else.
Yeah.
I feel a premonition coming on. That's a little cheesy matte shot up in the upper right-hand corner there. If you look closely, you'll see the actual square around the moon. I hate when that happens. Now, folks, I'm going to tell you a little story about this. I'm not going to lie to you. These kids are supposed to be sitting around smoking marijuana at the beginning of the scene. And we decided to actually try it for real. And yes, I did inhale, unlike certain presidents of ours. And the footage wound up being absolutely useless because several of us had never smoked marijuana before in our lives and got so utterly confused the footage was worthless. So a lot of this footage here we had to refilm later when we were a little more coherent. The voice you're hearing is a guy by the name of Bob Dorian, and those of you who watch American movie classics will recognize him as the host of American movie classics, or at least once was. We recorded him in a back room in New York City for cash, I might add, but that's another story. The idea here is they find this creepy stuff in the basement, and Sam wanted this to really act as a tale, a scary story that kids would sit around a campfire listening to, but instead of telling it, they're listening to it. That cheeseball Panasonic recorder was one that my father used to use in advertising for years, and we decided to have it. We used it to put sound to a lot of our Super 8. Was filmed several months later. We actually lost the original necklace. We wanted to get a close-up. So you can see there's sort of gold on the inside. The only one we could find was gold, so we had to spray paint it silver. and you can actually see the silver on her fingers because the paint came off on her fingers. Don't you hate when that happens?
I was gonna give it to you before we came up here, but
I'll be quiet because we want to hear this dialogue.
it's really the first chance we've had to be alone. Take a look.
That mirror, of course, will come to play in future Evil Dead movies, but I wouldn't want to give that away either.
I love it. I'll never take it off.
Coming up here is one of these sort of classic, well, we call it the Force, this roaming entity. We referred to it as the Force. Now in there, this sound is comprised of a wind, a low drone, a rumble track like an earthquake, and Sam Raimi's voice that we then processed later to make it sort of echoey and distant. So, because what that did is whenever it would move, Sam would go, wow. Yeah, see, like in here, you hear little movements, and that's really Sam just being a bigger ham than I've ever been. Now, this was the big cheese shot in the whole movie. We felt pressured to have one cheesy, just have some woman take her shirt off. That's all we knew. So I think she had to have a few drinks before she could do this. I can't confirm that, of course, folks. But finally she did it because we convinced her that it would be no big deal and would last about 3 seconds, which of course it did. Because the idea that you got to have sex and violence in horror movies never really computed to us. You just got to have lots of blood and gore if it's a horror movie, which you'll see plenty of that as well. Now these types of scenes are always my favorite, is a character being very scared, yet venturing out into a completely dark woods all alone and talking to themselves. Now you may hear a very sort of subtle chamber sound. It's like a drone. Oh, no, not the wolf. But you can hear a very, very subtle sound. And what that is when we were mixing the movie in New York City, the control panel had a problem with one of the faders, and it left an open chamber, and we were actually getting some feedback and some reverb. But whenever you opened that fader, which is the volume knob, that sound came up. And without doing anything, so we could just lay down long sections of this sound because we thought it was a good ambient sound just by a mistake that was in the control panel. So there you have it, folks. Didn't cost us a nickel. I think that was a little bit of a better moon matte shot. You can't see the edges quite as typically, and Sam wanted the moon to play pretty prominently in this whole thing. So you're going to see the moon 3 or 4 different times.
I know someone's out there.
Now, why she had to go this far into the woods to ask that question is sort of beyond me. I guess she must have heard something.
I heard you. I heard you in the cellar.
Now that sound, that wrenching sound you heard, was actually from a recording we did on a Super 8 movie called Within the Woods. It was a movie we used to raise money to make this movie. And it was actually just a simple apple crate that we yanked one of the slats of wood off, and it caught a rusty nail and made a very good sound, so we just decided to use it as a good startling noise. Again, you'll hear Sam's voice intermittently through this. This whole sequence is one of the larger sort of Force sequences in there. And Ellen Sandweiss was in the movie called Within the Woods that we did back in Michigan, that we showed investors that we could actually make a scary movie. And so there is a similar sequence in that Super 8 movie that, no, even on bootleg, you probably won't be able to find it. And if you do, it's a very poor quality. And you'll see similar scenes in there that were in this movie because it gave us a chance to test out scenes to see if we could sort of perfect scary sequences and moments. These are all pretty simple effects. A lot of these vines were filmed in backwards motion. You can see sort of a pre-rip there in her white robe. It was simply making scoring it ahead of time, so it already had a rip, putting the scars on her skin already and pretty much just revealing them and putting a whip sound effect to it. We're very big on hokey sound effects, which you'll probably hear, because we figure if you're going to make a horror movie, it better be creepy and weird. This was all shot in reverse motion. That's how you get the vine to actually go up and turn the corner around her leg. We actually filmed it where we pulled the vines away from her and then reversed it. It's really the only way to get vines to be intelligent. They're usually very difficult. That was another breast shot, folks, for those of you who are counting. Joe Bob Briggs, I know, does. Now, this is a very difficult scene. At this point in the movie, we lose about 30% of the women in the audience, and I have no idea why. Oh, yeah, that's why. This film was unrated. Gee, what a surprise. We didn't want to submit it to the ratings board because we were concerned that they would give us an X rating, which would pretty much kill a motion picture. So we decided to release it unrated. But even that, it forced us to be limited in some areas. If your movie is unrated, there's a number of television stations and radio stations and newspapers that will not run your ad because if you say it's unrated, they're not sure and they don't want to give a false indication. Bless their hearts. So this begins part of the chase sequence here that will get faster and faster. And Ellen, as you can see, is wearing very little. And usually in films these days, an actress or an actor would be padded from head to toe. They'd have knee pads, they'd have elbow pads, they'd have butt pads, they'd have pads for the pads. But this was 1979 with a very sort of rough and ready to go actress, and she was like, well, let's just do it. So during the course of filming this, you know, she would always walk away with some cut or scrape or scratch or bruise, and you know, she hit her point of no return several times. Some of these tracking shots are done on a dolly track that was not the standard dolly track that you might see on, you know, Entertainment Tonight. It was made out of plywood, and we used a wheelchair to travel the camera with her. And on several occasions there was blood on the plywood because of what Ellen had to go through. Those reeds are very dry and cracky, and it's kind of miserable. Obviously, there's no pads, folks. So she was a pretty good sport. It was also freezing. You don't really know that because by the time we got down there and started filming, it was late November. We filmed November, December, January. And of course, Michigan had one of the mildest winters on record, and Tennessee had one of the coldest. So go figure. Hey, wait a minute. I've seen those keys before. If she can just get her hands on those keys. This particular sequence we had filmed before in our Super 8mm prototype. Again, these are more shots where you mount the camera on a board and you put one person on either end of the board, and you can run up and go over bushes and around things, and it's very easy. Because we shot in 16mm, the camera equipment was very light and mobile and agile. Is she gonna get in or not, folks? I'm terrified. Now again, there's a good example of Sam's voice, hamming it up. Now this is known as a oneer, this type of shot, where there are no edits. The shot just plays in one. And you'll see near the end of the sequence, I can't get my jacket on, and another actor, Rob may tell this story. He loves to tell this one. But there's an actor coming up here, Rich. Oh, he tilts his head back because he blew his line, actually, and he was reacting to that. So just when you're laughing at him, get ready to laugh at me because I go to put my jacket on. I can't get it on, so we have to cut before we realize what a boo-boo I did.
Hey, you can stay somewhere in town tonight.
Let me just put my jacket on here. Oh! I hate when that happens. Happens a lot, folks. That's the magic of movies. It's called editing. Now this, of course, is still Tennessee. Shortly they will get inside the car, and the interior of the car will be Franklin, Michigan, in Sam's garage. That's the beauty of darkness. When you film during the day, you're always going to see stuff in the background, but at night you can just simply not light the background, as you will see right here. The wall of Sam's garage is probably 4 feet away, but by putting up sort of like a black fabric, you can block that out. This was filmed several months later, probably 6 months later. Will the car start? Incidentally, the fog that was used was a horrible oil-based substance. that got in camera lenses, and I'm sure that in about 10 years from now I'll regret ever doing it. Nowadays they have to use a fog that is water-based. It's much safer, but in those days we couldn't be bothered with that. We used the old oil-based stuff, and it was truly heinous. It had a very distinct smell. Now this road, you can see the car backing out here. We filmed that in probably December or January with photo doubles in the car because a lot of our actors had to leave. That road at that point was a solid mud track, and we had to put down a lot of straw in order to make that work, in order to get the car to move anywhere. Eventually we had to just walk up and down that road, which was about a quarter mile just on foot because no vehicle would make it down there. Here's Sam's garage again. This is a very interesting shot. Watch carefully. When I get out of the car, it'll look like I'm tilting to the left, but the car looks like it's straight. Sam will probably explain this in his story, but, well, now you get it twice from two different angles. What he did was, the car itself is actually pulling up on an embankment, so the car is tilted to the right. The camera is also tilted to the right to match the angle of the car, so that the camera and the car are on the same tilted degree. Therefore, me walking straight will look like I'm tilted in the opposite direction. Are you confused? Because I am. Anyway, that's how that shot was done.
Ashley?
Okay, now poor Ellen has to get out and walk in the darkness again, talking to herself. It's sort of a recurring theme in almost any of these sort of late 70s horror movies. There's a lot of monologues going on in front of nobody. Now watch behind her here. Right here, you'll see two lights in the background. Well, that's not really the car itself. That's just two lights we put in a road to simulate headlights. Just because we could, folks. Pretty soon, she will discover the collapsed bridge that is folded up. Sometimes it's a little hard to see, but it's folded up like a curled hand, like the bridge has been destroyed. An evil entity has torn it up to stop them from leaving, with the same dangerous bridge sign you saw earlier. Now, one of the disadvantages of night, again, is that we actually did tear this up the bridge. It was an abandoned bridge, and they let us tear it up. But again, because of night photography and not having enough money to really light the whole bridge, we couldn't show very easily that it was totally destroyed. Now, this sequence was filmed in Gladwin, Michigan, several months after the Marshall, Michigan footage, because we had about 2 more weeks of additional photography. So, again, you sort of see us change throughout the course of this film. Again, same false headlight look. It's not really a car back there. It's just two lights planted. This was our one and only crane shot in the whole movie, which was done on a scissor lift. It wasn't a fancy Hollywood crane. It was just something they would use for construction. Listen carefully. This is Bob Dorian now, talking again. His voice changes from Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2 because we couldn't get Bob Dorian back. Plus, we didn't even know we were going to do a sequel at that point, so you just have to do what you can. Well, that's a premonition if I've ever heard one. Lying to her friend for no good reason.
I don't know, but I think it's really some sort of extra sense or something.
Possibly just to set up later on.
It's a 7. I don't believe
Yeah, she's still tormenting her.
Queen of Spades.
Now this is going to be the first quote-unquote possession in the movie. You'll see that Ellen Sandweiss has very white eyes when she turns around. Now this was before the days of fancy, soft contact lenses. These were large hunks of glass called scleral lenses that fit over the entire eye. We had them specially made for the actors that had to be possessed, but there was a limitation that you could only keep them in for 15 minutes at a time because your eye needed to breathe, and you could only do that 5 times a day. So whenever an actor had to wear these, we had to be very careful to set up 2 or 3 shots that we could do very quickly so that we could get the eyes, the contacts back out of their eyes. Notice the fine work around the fireplace. That's Brother Don did the fieldstone work there because Sam wanted it to look a little more aggressive, a little more like teeth. Don sort of failed, but that's all right. He's a nice guy. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this was Rob Tappert's genius idea. He thought the Achilles tendon is the most vulnerable part of a person. So let's have the monster stab this woman in the Achilles heel. Ooh, I hate that. The sound effect that you heard was we took a knife and stuck it into an apple because we thought, you know, your Achilles heel would sound like an apple. That's what we figured. Again, this is no pads. There's no stunt coordinator. It's just us being foolish. Sam and I had done a bunch of this nonsense from years past. And so we would just fling ourselves against the wall and didn't think anything of it. Of course, you know, now that my back goes out every 5 minutes, now I think about it. Same thing here, Rich. Now throw yourself against the wall. Yeah, kind of like that. Good. Only do it about 4 or 5 times. We also had one camera only. A lot of stunts these days, they will film with 2, 3, 4 cameras or more. Now coming up here, you'll see sort of a dummy head that he's hitting. That way you could actually just hit the thing with the, you know, the butt of the axe and not have to worry about an actor or an actress. Frame, their job is to break the window before the camera gets there. So that is going to be just above the lens, this sort of T-bar configuration, and they ram it now. And again, there was no fake window. In those days, you just break a window. A lot of times in modern filmmaking, they'll use a candy glass, fake glass, or it'll be triggered by sort of an electric squib that'll break the window by itself. So we just decided to break the window. Now this wind that you're going to hear a lot through the movie is an actual wind that woke us up one morning in the house that we stayed that was very near this cabin. About 3 a.m., Sam woke up and he heard this really creepy wind just sort of howling through a window. And so he thought it'd be a great ambient track, so he woke up the sound man and said, quick, John, come here, record this. So he went, he turned it on and got a good 10 minutes of it. And that wound up being the basis for the creepy wind inside this cabin. And I've actually heard it on subsequent movies after this movie came out, so people stole our sound like we stole the sound from The Third Man, so I guess we really can't complain. Oh, there's nobody there, but there's a Tamaqua t-shirt. This is for Camp Tamaqua in the Algonquin Park in Ontario, Canada, where Sam Raimi went to camp for many years. This is now Rich's turn to go wandering into dark rooms, talking to himself. Now this point of view shot, this is a bathroom that doesn't really exist. We shot that in Rob's farmhouse, and we didn't really have any walls, so we just took sort of a wall covering that was yellow and created a wall that wasn't really there. Folks, that's Sam Raimi's hand right there. He might not admit it, but it is. He's not there, but there she is. Now that was a little reverse motion section where her fingers went up against his face, because you don't really want to jam your spiky fingernails into someone's face, so we had them against his face, and she just took them away real quick, and we reversed it. Now, obviously, you can't shove an actress's head in the fire, as much as you might like to, but so we used a little puppet head. I know you probably don't notice that at all.
Thank you.
And here we just took the fog machine and shoved it under her shirt and sort of gave her a good burst of fog.
Burning my pretty flesh. You have pretty skin. Give it to her.
Now you're going to find out that it's pretty handy that he had that buck knife all this time. Now I got to think about shelves. I don't know what it is. Okay, so obviously nothing landed on me here, but we figured, well, we have to delay Ash a little bit, otherwise he would jump in and want to help. So let's just pretend that he's weighted down by this one little piece of fiberboard. In retrospect, as all actors look back on their cheeseball performances, I really should have just pretended that I was more knocked out. But hey. Incidentally, that is Sam Raimi's voice providing the monster. Now, this is a classic case coming up here of why the movie has no rating. You got to hand it to her, folks. Now, the character Ash is really just a coward for the first full half of this movie until everyone else dies around him and he's forced to sort of pick up and carry the torch. Quite a delightful scene. A lot of these sound effects are courtesy of a turkey baster that we used in New York City to sort of use to make squishy goo sounds, and a lot of carrots and celery and chicken bones that we brought into a New York studio to stab and twist and make all those gushy noises. Unfortunately, apparently months after we left, the place smelled like sort of rotting chicken. This is the longest scream in motion picture history, folks. Incidentally, that shot from behind there was the producer, Rob Tappert. He may not admit it, or he may brag about it, but it's him, folks. Because the real actress was gone at that point. See, the film was supposed to go for about 6 weeks, starting in November. Well, our shoot was 12 weeks, exactly twice as long as it should have been, and a lot of people had things to do. A lot of crew members had to go back, get back to their family, their life. This is Rob Tappert's sister, Dorothy, here, filmed in a basement in Michigan, probably fully 2 years later. And Sam was kind of into the idea that these creatures spew, you know, not only blood, but sort of milk and coffee and whatever else we wanted them to. Coming up here, you will find Ted Raimi's feature film debut. Where, you ask? Where? That would be Sam's little brother, by the way. Right there, a very young Ted Raimi playing a tentative Hal Del Rich. His feet, I mean. Now, coming up here, when we were first taking the movie around and talking to film distributors about what they felt a motion picture had to have in it, a guy at a certain theater chain said, "Fellas, you gotta keep the blood running down the screen." So you'll see a couple of shots from now that it'll happen literally. Now, what we used here was basically bologna for parts of the leg, a big good hunk of bologna there. And cutting into that. Now that was the shot where the blood is literally running down the screen. So we took him literally. Now this is delightfully gory. Obviously, the fake parts are all, out of various sort of Caro syrup mixed with, food coloring and meat and squishy things like that. But you see some of the limbs are actually wiggling. Well, Rob Tapert plays one of the legs, and what they actually had to do was get below the floorboards, stick their leg up through a hole in the floor, and then we would create a false end. So Rob Tapert is below the floor, the actress is below the floor, with her head sticking up and her arm. And of course, they both got horrible cramps because it took a long time to remove the floorboards, put them in, and replace the floorboards.
We got a barrier now.
Caro syrup became my nemesis. That was the basis for the fake blood. And in the local town of Morristown, Tennessee, we bought about every amount of Caro syrup they had. We'd buy gallons of the stuff, mix it with red food coloring, and a little bit of non-dairy coffee creamer in order to give it an opaque look. And then we would put in a little bit of sometimes blue so it doesn't get too orange. And the trick is you always test it on a white surface to make sure it's not too blue or too orange or too red or whatever. And he just dumped in heaps and heaps of red food coloring. So the locals were always pretty funny. "What are you going to do with all that? You're going to make a cake?" Well, you milk coming up here, I think. Yeah, there's some good 2% milk coming out. It just gave a good variation, and it, lets you know that they're not just sort of normal people. Another one bites the dust. The one thing I like about this particular film that Sam Raimi is very good at is a dynamic range. We've just had a very loud sequence and a very sort of fast and furious sequence. And a lot of films today feel compelled to keep the noise and the editing just coming constantly. And what that does as a result, I feel, is it sort of numbs you to what's happening. This gives you a chance to settle down, have some quiet, go make a submarine sandwich, and get ready for the next piece in the movie. It's a very sort of long, quiet section, but it's a good chance to sort of calm down again, rather than just getting hit over and over and over again by the next big event. That little rat we got from a local pet store, we encouraged it by turning a can of dust off that you can get at camera stores. When you turn it upside down, it sort of activates the Freon and becomes a very cold jet. So you turn it upside down and you just spray it at the rat's butt, and they'll go, believe me. We were in a pretty rural area, so a lot of these old rusty chains and stuff were all very easy to come by. The one tricky thing here was we actually did at one point hold a running chainsaw over Betsy's torso. And, you got to be careful. There's no stunt coordinators. And, of course, everyone loves to point out, well, you can see the vein. You can see her heartbeat in her neck. Why I'm stopping because of that cheesy necklace, I'll never know. But this is where, of course, all the audience is screaming, no, you moron, cut her up, cut her up. This movie is very enjoyable with a large college crowd because all the big, tough, macho football players, when they get scared, they don't scream, they just swear really loud and hit each other. They're too macho, you see, to whimper and cower like they should, like the character Ash here. And there's that darn wind sound again. I got to do what every self-respecting boyfriend would do. I got to bury her. Now, coming up, this particular piece of music is called Die Games. This is where the variation is between the earlier sequence where I was giving her the horridly ugly necklace and she was looking at my closed eyes. Now it's she's playing games with me, and as a monster, that's why we call it Die Games. About this point in the movie, I start getting sort of a permanent sweat. So I had to carry around a water bottle that was a little sprayer, like a garden sprayer. Just keep spritzing my face. Unfortunately, I had to do it for the next 2 movies after that, so oh well. Now, that actress in the background is not Betsy Baker anymore because this shot was done long after she left. That's a local sort of wannabe actress who we met at a local community theater in kind of a lousy Chekhov play and got to be very friendly with her. She was very game. We would say, hey, come on out here to this cabin and we're going to cover you with blood and put you in a cheesy wig and torment you for days on end. And she was like, oh, great, I'd love to. Maybe I'll bring something to eat. She was very pleasant and very willing to be tormented. Like all good actors. With the cheesiest wig. She kind of, all of a sudden she has a Barbie wig on. That was our version of sort of matching and continuity. This shot, you could see that it followed Ash as he stepped across the grave there, and that was done with the camera and a 2x4 and a guy on either end, and you couldn't really look through the lens to see what was happening. This is a good stroke of luck. Sam's lying down on the ground with a camera, and with this one shovel fill, it filled up everything but the one area where my face is. Now, normally, you'd have to do that 400 times to get that right. It just, every so often when you shoot enough footage, something cool happens. But wait, where's that wonderful necklace? There it is. Go get it, Ash. Sure, go ahead. What could possibly go wrong? Now, coming out of the ground here, that's actually another actress poking her head out of basically ground up manure and mixed with peat moss that we shot in Sam's garage. Now, that's this actress, Barbara Carey, who's ripping at my legs here. And she had fake nails on, and actually some of it, she wound up sort of wrenching part of her nails off. But that's true dedication. I thought I had it rough. Now these are these It's Murder beams that I spoke of. These are these styrofoam beams that are very, very handy for hitting people in the face and jamming them in the face. a very dark object, you have to figure out a way to make it visible. And watch closely now, you can see a wonderfully well-placed box of Band-Aids amid all the blood. This wider shot, on the floor there, we didn't really figure out how blood could adhere to dirt. So we just put down some garbage bags and sort of poured blood over that so it wouldn't soak into the dirt. This is my favorite sequence in the movie coming up. The entire section, and as Sam will probably explain to some degree, is tilted at a 45-degree angle. I suppose in modern day standards it wouldn't be that weird, but we all thought Sam was absolutely crazy when he said, I want to film this whole sequence at a very extremely tilted angles. And you'll notice he's pretty faithful to that all the way through. We didn't know what it would look like or how it would edit together, and Sam was pretty much of the opinion, well, just shut up and trust me. And this shot tilts from 45 degrees to this side and ends up 45 degrees to the other side. If we had continued on, the shot did continue. This shot is Sam hanging upside down in the rafters, again with the camera taped to his hand, and he's doing sort of a reverse sit-up. At this point, he's now very uncomfortable, arching his back, pointing the camera at me. This whole sequence is about ridiculously difficult shots to get. This is now completely underneath me, where it was a fake shoe that we swiped across the camera lens. I was up standing, my feet were on an actual box somewhere else, and it was much easier to swipe an empty shoe across the lens. Again, notice the camera tilt. Coming up here is a very entertaining shot. This shot basically took us an entire day. It's on a track directly above me, going above the rafters and moving with me as I walk. But when you have nothing but time, you get shots like that. That's partially why I think this movie has some appeal, that there's some shots you don't see in normal movies. Now this was, I'm lying on my stomach, putting my hand into a kiddie pool with the frame of a mirror around it. And in order to get a reflection in the water, we had to pump about 9 billion megawatts of light into my face, which was delightful. And again, in this sequence, it was Ash shoots his shotgun out the window, so we just take a shotgun and make sure everyone's out of the way, and you shoot out the window. But wait, Ash, where's that necklace? It's coming up. The scratches on my face here are real, thanks to Ted Raimi. When his arms came through the floorboards, he actually did scratch my face. So we just decided it looked good. Now this will be Ash sort of hallucinating various sounds here. The people are walking on the ceiling. And what that is that's Sam Raimi, folks. Yes, Mr. Director, walking around in a recording studio with high heels taped to his feet, because his feet were too big to fit in the shoes. Isn't that a nice, delicate walk? Cue the necklace. At this point, I'd kind of become an expert on how to make your hand look grimy for close-ups. See, my fingers are actually sort of sticking together. And what that is you'd pour the Caro syrup on, sort of rub it around, take some ashes from the fire, my character was Ash, scrape it around, and then go outside and sort of just get grime in your fingernails. Now, at this point in the movie, Sam wanted all sound to be completely eliminated. No wind, no clock, no nothing, no breathing, so that it would get extremely quiet to get your attention. And I think it worked. That may have been Rob Tappert's hands. I'm not sure. They sort of look like Rob's. Now, of course, you can't really shoot someone in the face, so let's just shoot a dummy, you know. Unfortunately, you can kind of see the tube that was pumping the blood into her cheeks at that point, and I hate to admit it, folks, but that's the way it is. And outside that window, you can actually see sort of a black fabric, because a lot of this we filmed during the day and blacked out the windows to make it look at night. Well, guess who's back to visit? Mr. Cowardly Traitor. Now, this is the original setup where the a small magnifying glass was going to play that the book gets near the fire but not close enough. You'll see the different variation of that. This is always a sequence that sort of gets a pretty good response. The old eye gouge, which is basically a dummy head filled with all kinds of delightful goo, and I just squeezed the pus out of his head. Now you see I grabbed something here. Unfortunately, it's misinterpreted as one of his, let's say a private part of his, but it's not true, folks. He supposedly got killed by the woods and had part of a branch sticking out from him, but because where the camera was and how it was in context, some people thought I was pulling something else off of him, and it's just not true, folks. By this point in filming, we filmed this this movie pretty much in continuity directly through, and you can see how messy that floor was. Every night we would have to, in order to be able to walk on it, we'd have to take the fire, which had burned down to ashes at the end of the night, and spread all the ashes, all the remnants across the entire floor. So the floor used to be a delightful sort of brown color. By this point in filming, it's totally gray and literally ash covered, because it's the only way we could sort of soak up all the Caro syrup and the goo. And these are the points where I pretty much would just have to go home and hop in the shower. One Sunday morning, I rode back in the morning because we'd film all night. I rode back in the back of a pickup truck past a bunch of churchgoers because I couldn't sit on any seat because I would stick to everything. Yeah, Bruce, Ellen, just hit Bruce in the back. He'll be fine. Just keep trying. That necklace has got to be worth something. Come on, get the thing. He got it, folks. Good catch. Throw it in. Now what's going to be coming up is a pretty involved animation sequence that was filmed over the course of about 3 months in a basement in Michigan. And it took about 3 months because animation is so slow. We filmed some things down there in Tennessee, but we couldn't do the entire sequence because we knew the animation would have to be filmed under very specific conditions. And right here is where it first begins. You've got blinks, you've got rotting, you've got hair falling out. So what we had to do is combine animation with a real live action, so we had to mat things together. So that's a combination of a guy wiggling combined with an animated rotting head, and you matted those together, and it makes a pretty good combination for a low-budget thing. Normally in a low-budget horror movie, you wouldn't see this much animation. Where it's gurgling there, you can actually see sort of the skull shifting, and rather than trying to cover it up some other way, we decided to put a sound effect to the shifting mat lines, which normally just means your effect is a little more primitive, but we thought, what the heck, let's just go with it. Again, this is a good example of getting everything really quiet for a couple of beats before it starts to get loud again. I think it's a good sound theory. And yes, that is oatmeal. Just when you thought it was safe. By the way, folks, that delightful concoction that hit my face was a combination of Caro syrup and Alpo dog food. It was good enough for Lassie. I guess it's good enough for me. And now the big finale. That section there where it hits the ground and the head actually seems to rise up, it's because it was filmed upside down and turning the camera upside down so that when the goo hit, it would actually fall down and make it look like it was more of an explosion. And I just confused myself again, but I thought it was a good trick. Those were some delightful cockroaches. Some of them were Madagascar cockroaches that when you picked them up, they would hiss at you. They're about 3 inches long. We picked those up courtesy of Michigan State University in the science lab. But I guess everything's okay now. Again, we had to estimate what the aftermath would look like because we had no idea. So we put a couple different colors there, some blue, some green, and we at least knew the positions, that this guy would sort of rot here and she would sort of rot there, and knowing that we'd have to fill in all the gaps at a later date. Clock is ticking again. And now I believe this was actually filmed at night, and you can see that we have sort of a fake daylight in the background there. You just sort of have to film when you can film. Now, unfortunately, that's just a still shot of the sunrise because we didn't have enough footage to actually be worth it. And again, we had to estimate what the armholes would look like because when we filmed this, we hadn't filmed the other sequence yet. So they're really just sort of cut out holes in the door. We didn't really know what the aftermath would look like when we really filmed it. So there. Yep, everything's okay now. Not a worry in the world. Now coming up, you'll see quite a fun little shot. It was pretty much an afterthought, to my understanding, of, well, how do we end this movie with a little zing? So we end it with the ultimate sort of force shot, starting on a single leaf and roving all the way through from the back woods there, all the way through the back cabin. This we used the assistance of about 2 or 3 local people because all of our crew members had fled. One to yank this back door open. Sam would call out on a cue. It was Sam running with the camera. A third person here pulling doors apart. And Sam would basically just run directly into me. There was a rumor that's been going around for years now that Sam actually rode a motorcycle, put the camera on the motorcycle and rammed into me. And we've sort of perpetuated that lie for years, so I'm not really going to tell you whether it's true or not. We go back to this sort of happy music at the end because I think Sam figured that the movie's grim and miserable enough. Let's go with some sort of happy, upbeat music. So it adds a good sort of cross purposes to the whole thing. But you'll find as the credits continue to play on, this song will get very distant and echoey and will start to slow down because Sam's theory was everything dies in this movie. Everything. So it's slowly dying here and getting more and more obscure. Eventually, it'll start to slow down and will come to a slow and halting death, and you're going to be left with just that sort of haunting sound. Here we go. And it's dead. Now we just have that wind again. Now, fake shemps, that credit, everyone says, well, what's a fake shemp? Well, when we did movies in high school, we would always lose our actors. And so we had to get someone in to take their place. So we called them fake shemps after the Three Stooges. So there you have it, folks. Thanks for watching. Watch the sequels.